Here he is, friends. He got his suit back just in time. And no matter what happens in his life, he gets absolutely no respect.
For decades, Johnny Carson was the undisputed king of late-night television. His charm, wit, and effortless interviews made The Tonight Show the heartbeat of American entertainment. But behind the laughter and applause, Carson privately admitted that some of his so-called Golden Age guests were anything but golden. In fact, he believed some were manipulative, cruel, and even downright evil. Who were they? And what did Carson really see when the cameras stopped rolling? Johnny Carson reigned over late-night television for 30 years, hosting The Tonight Show from 1962 to 1992. With millions tuning in every night, he had the power to make or break careers, shape public opinion, and create cultural moments that would last for generations. Viewers saw a smooth, polite host laughing with Hollywood's elite. But Carson was no fool. Off-camera, he had sharp instincts about his guests, and he often saw through the polished images they presented to the world. Over the years, he quietly revealed that some of the biggest stars of the Golden Age carried dark sides. Their charm was a mask. Their talent was undeniable, but their actions behind closed doors revealed arrogance, cruelty, and sometimes behavior that shocked even Johnny himself. So who were these 9 guests who, according to Carson, weren't as golden as they seemed? Let's begin. Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra was one of the most frequent and beloved guests on The Tonight Show. His charisma, legendary voice, and larger-than-life persona made him a favorite of audiences everywhere. But Carson privately admitted that Sinatra could also be one of the most intimidating figures he ever encountered. Known for his connections to organized crime, Sinatra was rumored to use his influence to get what he wanted, and to punish those who crossed him. Carson once revealed that hosting Sinatra was both an honor and a risk. Behind the jokes and music, he knew he was dealing with a man who demanded respect and wasn't afraid to enforce it. Off-camera, Sinatra was known for volatile moods and a temper that made even the toughest producers nervous. His feuds with journalists, actors, and even other Rat Pack members revealed a side of him that was ruthless, controlling, and sometimes cruel. Carson respected Sinatra's talent, but he also admitted privately that he considered him one of the most dangerous men to sit across from him. So, was Sinatra simply a product of his era? Or did his darker side prove that even legends can hide truly troubling behavior? Joan Rivers. Joan Rivers was one of Johnny Carson's greatest discoveries. He gave her a platform, welcomed her as a frequent guest host, and championed her sharp wit and fearless comedy. But their relationship ended in one of the most shocking betrayals in late-night history. In 1986, Rivers launched The Late Show starring Joan Rivers on the brand new Fox network, a direct competitor to Carson's Tonight Show. What stung Johnny most wasn't that she took the job, but that she hadn't told him personally. He heard the news through the press. Carson never forgave her. For the remaining years of his life, he refused to speak to Rivers or acknowledge her again. What made the situation even more heartbreaking was that Rivers had always considered Carson her mentor, even a father figure. To Carson, her actions felt like disloyalty of the highest order. He once reportedly said, "She could have told me. She owed me that." Their feud became legendary, and though Rivers later tried to reconcile, Carson held firm until his death. For him, it was a betrayal so deep it revealed a side of Rivers that he believed was selfish, ambitious, and cold. Was Joan Rivers truly evil? Or was she just another ambitious comedian trying to break barriers in a brutal industry? Burt Reynolds. When Burt Reynolds walked onto Carson's stage, audiences erupted with excitement. He was the very definition of a Hollywood leading man, ruggedly handsome, effortlessly charming, and with a mischievous grin that suggested he was always in on the joke. Reynolds was a favorite on The Tonight Show, and his banter with Johnny was often electric. But off-camera, Carson saw a different side. Burt Reynolds was notorious for his arrogance and volatility, especially as fame consumed him during the 1970s. Behind the scenes, crew members whispered about his short temper, his bruising ego, and his tendency to treat others as though they existed purely to serve him. One infamous appearance alongside actress Mark Summers turned into a disaster. Reynolds, visibly irritated by playful jabs, escalated things until the moment turned hostile. What was meant to be light-hearted comedy left Carson's staff scrambling to control the chaos. It wasn't the first or last time Reynolds' charm slipped into cruelty. Carson privately confided that Reynolds had two faces: the suave guest who played to the cameras and the self-absorbed star who didn't mind belittling others when the spotlight dimmed. The arrogance, Johnny believed, wasn't an act. It was who Reynolds had become after too many years of unchecked stardom. The question was obvious. Was Burt Reynolds just a product of the Hollywood machine? Or did his darker behavior reveal the danger of unchecked power in an industry built on image? Bob Hope. Few names loomed larger over the golden age of entertainment than Bob Hope. To the public, he was a national treasure. The wisecracking comedian who entertained troops overseas, the quick-witted host of countless specials, and a man who seemed to embody patriotic charm. He was one of Carson's most frequent guests, often appearing during holidays to thunderous applause. But Johnny Carson, ever the sharp observer, saw through the polished exterior. Hope's appearances became increasingly frustrating for him as the years went on. In private conversations, Carson revealed that Bob Hope was one of the most difficult guests he ever had. By the 1980s, Hope was aging, and his once quick reflexes on stage were slowing. His jokes felt recycled, his timing off. Producers reportedly fed him cue cards and pre-written material, and Carson grew tired of pretending the banter was spontaneous. For a man who valued authenticity, Johnny found the charade exhausting. But even beyond the performance issues, Carson disliked what he considered Hope's coldness. While the public saw a patriotic hero, Carson described him as calculated, distant, and sometimes even cruel in his dealings with others. Hope was a master at self-promotion, never passing up a chance to stay in the spotlight, even at the expense of genuine connection. Carson once admitted that interviewing Hope felt like talking to a prop, because the man was so focused on controlling his image that he never let his real self slip through. The hero America adored, Carson believed, was just another illusion. It begged the question, was Bob Hope truly the generous national icon fans believed, or was he simply a master manipulator who perfected the art of image over substance? Frank Gifford. Frank Gifford, the legendary NFL star turned broadcaster, was one of those guests who seemed to have it all. He was good-looking, successful, and carried himself with a polished confidence that audiences adored. On The Tonight Show, he played the role of the all-American hero, trading jokes with Carson and telling stories of football glory. But Johnny Carson was never fully convinced by the clean-cut image. He had heard the rumors, and like many in Hollywood, he knew that Gifford's personal life was far more complicated than what viewers saw on screen. Gifford's marriage to television host Kathy Lee Gifford made him a household name, but it also exposed him to a level of public scrutiny he had never faced as an athlete. Behind the scenes, Carson's producers whispered about Gifford's affairs and indiscretions. The image of the devoted husband and wholesome broadcaster didn't quite line up with what insiders knew. In 1997, years after Carson retired, Gifford's name was splashed across tabloids for being caught in a very public cheating scandal. The revelation confirmed what Carson had suspected all along. The charming guest who sat on his couch wasn't as innocent as he wanted the world to believe. For Carson, it was proof of a larger pattern, that many of the so-called Golden Age icons were masters of performance, not just on stage, but in their personal lives. They had perfected the art of smiling for the cameras while hiding the darker truths just out of sight. So the question becomes, how many of these beloved guests were truly authentic? And how many were living double lives that Carson quietly saw through? Zsa Zsa Gabor. If there was one guest who embodied the word diva, it was Zsa Zsa Gabor. The Hungarian-American socialite and actress was glamorous, witty, and always entertaining. She lit up Carson's stage with her dramatic presence, dripping in diamonds and speaking with her signature accent that fascinated American audiences. But behind the sparkle, Zsa Zsa was also one of Carson's most controversial guests. Her reputation as a demanding, entitled celebrity preceded her, and Johnny often had to tread carefully to balance her over-the-top personality with his own sharp wit. Zsa Zsa was notorious for her string of marriages, 9 in total, and for her extravagant lifestyle. While she made for entertaining television, Carson confided that her arrogance often crossed the line into cruelty. She was known to belittle staff, snap at assistants, and treat people she considered beneath her with open disdain. One infamous moment came in the 1980s when Zsa Zsa was arrested for slapping a Beverly Hills police officer during a traffic stop. The incident cemented her reputation as someone who thought the rules didn't apply to her. When Carson later spoke about the episode, he made it clear he wasn't surprised. For years, he had seen her entitled behavior up close on his show. While audiences laughed at her outrageous stories, Carson saw something darker. A person consumed by vanity and power. He once commented privately that she represented everything dangerous about celebrity culture. A life so wrapped in wealth and image that basic decency was lost. So, was Zsa Zsa simply a product of Hollywood excess? Or was she an example of how fame can twist a person into something unrecognizable? Orson Welles. Few figures in entertainment embodied both brilliance and arrogance quite like Orson Welles. The man behind Citizen Kane was a frequent guest on The Tonight Show, and Johnny Carson often praised his towering intellect and commanding presence. Welles was captivating. When he spoke, the audience leaned in, mesmerized by his booming voice and larger-than-life stories. But Carson also saw something troubling beneath the genius. Orson Welles was not just a visionary filmmaker. He was also known for being manipulative, controlling, and sometimes cruel to those around him. His reputation in Hollywood was legendary, not just for his talent, but for the bridges he burned. Colleagues described Welles as a man who could charm you with one hand and destroy your confidence with the other. He was notorious for dismissing collaborators, mocking critics, and demanding complete creative control on his projects. Many careers suffered because of his ruthless pursuit of perfection and his unwillingness to compromise. Carson respected Welles's artistry, but privately admitted that hosting him could be exhausting. Welles had a tendency to dominate conversations, often leaving little room for anyone else. The audience might have been entertained, but Johnny sometimes felt like he was simply a stagehand for Welles's monologues. What troubled Carson most was Welles's treatment of those who didn't meet his impossible standards. Stories of assistants reduced to tears, actors dismissed as pawns, and colleagues discarded without a second thought painted a picture of a man whose genius was matched only by his cruelty. So was Orson Welles a victim of his own towering intellect? Or did his brilliance give him permission to act in ways others would call ruthless, even evil? Dean Martin. Dean Martin was one of Johnny Carson's most beloved guests. The king of cool, with his effortless charm, velvety voice, and trademark glass of scotch in hand, could light up the Tonight Show stage like few others. His banter with Carson was legendary, often filled with playful jabs, smooth one-liners, and that unmistakable grin. But behind the charm and laughter was a man fighting demons. Carson knew it, even if the audience didn't. Martin's easygoing persona often masked his dependence on alcohol, his struggles with family relationships, and his tendency to retreat into isolation. Carson, who admired Martin's comedic timing, also recognized the darkness beneath the surface. Martin was often described as distant, even cold, when the cameras weren't rolling. Friends recalled that he kept people at arm's length, preferring to drown his pain in a drink rather than face it head-on. Perhaps most troubling was Martin's relationship with the Rat Pack. While audiences adored their camaraderie, Carson privately admitted he disliked the way Martin and his crew often indulged in mean-spirited antics, especially at the expense of others. What looked like good fun on TV sometimes revealed itself as cruel mockery behind the scenes. Martin's personal tragedies only deepened the heartbreak. The death of his son in a plane crash devastated him, and many who knew him said he was never the same afterward. Carson, who had lived through his own share of private struggles, sympathized, but he also saw how Martin's pain fed into destructive behavior that hurt those closest to him. For Carson, Dean Martin embodied the tragic paradox of the Golden Age, a man adored by millions, who hid pain and cruelty behind a smile. So the question remains, did Dean Martin's demons make him a victim of circumstance, or did they transform him into someone far darker than his fans ever realized? Richard Nixon. Perhaps the most controversial figure ever to sit across from Johnny Carson was not a Hollywood star, but a U.S. president, Richard Nixon. His 1973 appearance on The Tonight Show was historic, the first time a sitting president ever walked onto Carson's stage. To the public, it looked like a groundbreaking television moment. Nixon, usually stiff and uncomfortable in front of cameras, tried to loosen up. He joked awkwardly with Carson, smiled more than usual, and delivered lines clearly crafted by his speechwriters to make him seem one of the people. The audience laughed politely, and newspapers praised Carson for landing such a guest. But Carson, ever the sharp observer, wasn't fooled. Off camera, he described Nixon as one of the most calculating guests he ever interviewed. Every laugh, every smile, every attempt at humor was carefully staged to win over the public. To Johnny, it felt less like a conversation and more like a campaign, ad disguised as late-night entertainment. What disturbed Carson most was the timing. Nixon appeared on The Tonight Show at the height of the Watergate scandal, when the country was deeply divided and trust in the presidency was crumbling. Carson later admitted he felt used, that the appearance wasn't about fun or entertainment, but about manipulation. The American people saw a leader trying to charm his way back into their hearts. Carson saw a man desperately clinging to power, willing to exploit comedy and culture for his own survival. In private, Carson referred to Nixon as one of the darkest presences to ever grace his stage. Unlike entertainers who hid their egos or flaws, Nixon represented something much bigger, the ability of power itself to mask corruption behind a smile. So, the question looms larger than ever. Was Nixon simply another politician trying to humanize himself on TV, or was he, as Carson believed, proof that even the most powerful can use entertainment as a weapon to deceive? The so-called Golden Age of Hollywood and television is often remembered as glamorous, innocent, and larger than life. Audiences saw polished stars, smiling politicians, charming crooners, and comedians who seemed to live only to make us laugh. But Johnny Carson's private reflections paint a very different picture. He knew better than anyone that fame is a double-edged sword. Behind the charm of Frank Sinatra was a man feared for his temper and alleged underworld ties. Behind the brilliance of Orson Welles lurked arrogance and cruelty. Even beloved figures like Bob Hope and Dean Martin carried reputations for coldness, cruelty, or destructive demons. And then there were those like Joan Rivers and Richard Nixon, whose betrayals and manipulations left scars that never healed. For Carson, hosting The Tonight Show was more than telling jokes and interviewing celebrities. It was like holding up a mirror to American culture. Night after night, he gave people an escape, a laugh before bed, a sense of normalcy. But off camera, he often told friends that the entertainment industry and the powerful figures who ruled it was far from normal. Carson's genius lay in his ability to smile through it all, to keep the illusion alive for his audience, even as he privately acknowledged the darkness behind the curtain. He knew that fame could corrupt, that ambition could twist, and that the very people audiences adored were often deeply flawed, sometimes even cruel. In many ways, Carson's observations were prophetic. The myths of the Golden Age have slowly crumbled as more truths emerge about its stars. And perhaps that's the real lesson, that even in the brightest spotlight, shadows will always exist. So what do we take away from Carson's perspective? That fame and morality rarely go hand in hand, and that sometimes the most beloved figures of an era can be hiding the darkest truths of all. Johnny Carson entertained millions for 3 decades. He was the man America trusted to end their day with laughter, warmth, and charm. But behind the smiles, Carson carried a wisdom that went beyond comedy. He knew that not every guest was what they seemed. He saw through the masks. He recognized the arrogance of stars, the manipulations of politicians, and the betrayals of those he once trusted. And while he rarely revealed these truths publicly, his private reflections remind us that celebrity culture has always been built on illusions. At 30 years on top, Carson's ability to balance truth and performance was unmatched. He gave audiences the show they wanted, but he never forgot what he learned: that power, fame, and money can bring out the very worst in people. So, the next time you watch clips of The Tonight Show and see Carson laughing alongside a Hollywood icon, remember this: behind those laughs, there may have been tension, secrets, or even contempt. Carson knew it, and now, so do we. The story of Johnny Carson and the 9 Golden Age guests who were actually evil isn't just about late-night television. It's about the price of fame, the masks people wear, and the truth that always lingers in the shadows. What do you think? Were these legends simply flawed humans, or did some truly deserve the label of evil that Carson hinted at? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more untold stories of the stars you thought you knew. Because if Johnny taught us anything, it's this: there's always more to the story than what you see on stage.